They say that life is hard, that there's not enough to go around, and that it's not spiritual to want money. And repeatedly, they say to themselves, I'm not good enough. I say that life is filled with possibilities. Abundance is literally all around us. And you being here is more than enough. My name is Arabelle, and my assignment in this life is to question the belief systems, to learn the secrets that are hidden out in the open, and to show others what's possible. Each episode, I bring you a guest or a message that will make you question your choices, challenge your views, dig deep into your beliefs, and wake you up to your truth. Join us as we walk through this thing called life. You ready? Let's do this.
Welcome, Iris. So glad that you're here on this podcast today. Before we dive into today's conversation, if I were to ask people around you to describe you in 3 words, what would they say?
Authentic, real. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Just honest and real. But my authenticity always is a little bit more raw or hopefully insightful than the norm. I hope that's okay.
So before we start, I know your story, but our listeners might not. Could you tell us your story of where it's all started and what you've experienced throughout your whole colorful journey and what got you here today?
So my first 18 years I was born in New York City, and then my parents, I say, escaped to Connecticut, in their eyes. But then when I was 18, as you know, there was a car accident, and my face was blown off my head, and my femur was shattered. And so I was in and out of the hospital for 2 years, and that set me on a journey for the next 25 years. But it wasn't actually planned out. I just ended up searching for the meaning of life. So for 8 years, I studied philosophy. And then I was in Thailand, and I walked into a door, and I'll just say it. It was funny because there was a woman from Australia named Shelley King, and I was wounded. I had a big gash, and she healed me with her hands. I don't know. It'd be really funny if I get an email from Shelley King. I'm talking about January 1994, Koh Samui, Thailand. And then I spent a week with her studying Hinduism and Buddhism and yoga and meditation for the first time. And then that set me off on another 8 years. I ended up at Duke University studying parapsychology to try to understand, because it really put into question the first 8 years of studying Western philosophy. All of a sudden, I was thinking, this could all be bullshit. Like everything that Westerners study, when you find out about this other paradigm, it's magical to us, but it's normal to them. So for the 8 years, I studied Buddhism, Hinduism, Kabbalah, and then I got into a relationship 8 years later that set me on a path of studying psychology because I was kind of wondering, how could this drama and dysfunctionality be so interesting and attractive? And So for 25 years, there was 8 years of philosophy, 8 years of spirituality, 8 years of psychology. And then I was teaching at, 2 other things. I went to film school, and I also went to yoga, teacher training, and meditation. So I'm teaching in 2009 at Rodney Yee's studio in Oakland. And a woman came in, and she put her hand down on the mat. And I watched her back splay open. And I literally heard a voice that said, it's time to give back. And so if you looked at my life for those 25 years, you'd be like, oh, he's a lost soul. Like, what is he doing in Paris? What is he doing in Thailand? What is he doing? Like, he's just, he should be in a bank working with all of his peers. And instead he's reading books and practicing yoga, doing all of this crazy seeking. And then all of a sudden it all made sense, which was 2009. And the film school and the yoga school and the philosophy and the spirituality, everything just came together at once. And to me, I've been totally living my life's purpose every minute since then, because I get to teach all the things that I spent those 25 indulgent years learning. And it's been really so satisfying. You know what I mean?
I've heard of that story that you have mentioned on other podcasts and interviews. And what really got me thinking was, at one point in our life, a lot of us hear that kind of calling. But then I guess in that point, we have a choice whether to listen or not listen. If you had not listened at that point, do you think you'll be where you are today, or you'll end up being where you are now anyway?
No. And that's what I deal with as a psychotherapist. There are all these people who feel betrayed, and it shows up as a midlife crisis because society, capitalism, democracy has sold you a bill of goods, right? They sold you this bill of goods that if you become rich, if you have 2.3 kids, if you drive this car and own a home, you'll be happy. And all of my peers are wealthy and successful, and they've done all these things, and a lot of them are not that happy. So then they have to reevaluate. And what I always quote Nietzsche. He says you have to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Like all of a sudden you wake up and you're 45 and you're divorced and your kids don't speak to you, but you got to pay all this money for college, and your marriage is, you just don't understand things, and then you have to figure things out as an adult. So I had the benefit of having my midlife crisis when I was 18. And, fortunately or not, it took 25 years for me to, put it all together. But now being of service to others and, working with individuals in my office and then writing this book. And I get all these incredible emails all the time. I got this phone call this morning, a phone call, which is weird. Somebody who had never tried meditation from Florida called up. And we really got into it, like just out of nowhere, just on the phone. And so I love that. I love when people reach out. I love interacting with people. And so, I can tell you that although from the outside, the life of Ira Israel might have looked, kind of meandering. I was doing what I felt my vocation was, my calling, which was to learn. And then all of a sudden there was this flip, and then it's to teach. But of course, I'm the biggest student in the class anyways. We learn we teach what we need to learn. So every time I'm at Esalen or any of these places, new, wonderful, beautiful things come out with the interaction with the students. And I have to rethink, wow, am I really doing that? Am I in integrity? Can I really hit this point home by showing something from my own life, some overcoming or transcendence or something like that? So, it's been really just satisfying.
Yeah, I'm curious, what would you say to those? Because I work with a lot of people as well, and I see them asking this question where, what am I supposed to do here? What's my calling? I'm not hearing anything. I'm listening, but then I'm kind of stuck in this red race, and I just don't know where I'm supposed to go. There are those who are impatient and feeling like, what the heck am I doing here? What would you say to those?
So voco in Latin means calling. So your vocation is what the universe is calling you to do. So you receive information on a daily basis. It comes in the form of taste. Like you have a taste for art, you have a taste for literature, you have a taste for interacting with others. As you read in my book, what I analyze are systems of thought, like capitalism, the myth of romantic love, what we call democracy, things like that, and all the things that influence why we think, the shit that we think. Most of our thoughts are negative and redundant. And that's a really bizarre thing. I mean, my cat eats when it's hungry, sleeps when it's tired, plays when it's playful. And, we're thinking about our cars and our retirements and our credit cards and the schools we went to and this terrible thing that happened to us and why this person's not texting us. And we just have this miasma of craziness, And so what I try to do, first thing I do with patients in the office, to find your vocation, I say, okay, close your eyes. At 6:30, you're going to receive a phone call, and your mother is going to tell you that you had a gay uncle who you never met, who had no heirs, and he has just left you $500 million. How do you spend the next 5 years of your life? Okay, so you have to eliminate money from the equation. If you want to find your vocation, you want to find what's going to fuel your heart and nourish your soul, you just have to strike that out. So if money didn't matter, what would you do? So that's the first question. And then we kind of just tease out, like, what do you love doing? You know, what do you love, you know? So anyways, that's how I start. Anybody can go through this process and find their vocation, you know, meditate on it and really tap into what the universe is telling you you should be doing.
Beautiful. So I think there's a big part where we really need to be present and we really need to learn to listen as well.
Totally.
Yeah. So in your book, How to Survive Your Childhood Now That You're an Adult, you talk about authenticity a lot. And you also said that if I were to ask people around you, one of the things that they would describe you is authentic. So what is authenticity? What is being authentic like?
I break it down into 5 things: attachment, atonement, attunement, presence, and congruence. So attachment is attachment theory. And this is really interesting to me because this is the kind of stuff that I'm studying now. I'm studying Lacan, and he says that language alienates us from the real, from the world. So for me, the individuation process and the individuation processes that we go through in life are really important because we form a paradigm of whether the world is a safe place and we can securely attach and trust people, or we have to hoard and we're scared and there might not always be enough and that person will screw me if I turn my back. I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to, you know. So that, I feel like that forms very early. So you should know, if you want to be authentic, the first thing you should know is your attachment dynamic, which influences your paradigm. You know, are you an introvert, extrovert? How do you connect to people? Things like that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is atonement. So at-one-ment. This is really, I love this. At-one-ment. So there's a beautiful quote by Suzuki Roshi. He says, "You're perfect and there's room for improvement." So all of us, whatever spiritual life you have, and if we talk about Vedanta and ayahuasca and things like that later, there's a part of you that is able to watch your thoughts, right? And that part of you, whatever you think of it, Nirvana, Jesus, Moses, it doesn't matter. But that part of you is perfect. And then the ego that's covering it, all the stuff that you learned, that could probably use a little tweaking. So the way we do this, atonement, is through the tool of forgiveness. So you can't change your past. What good does it do complaining about it? So if you're sitting around saying, oh, I'd be happy now if I went to Harvard. Oh, I'd be happy now if I won the lottery, if my parents didn't get divorced, blah, blah, blah. That's what your mind does. And instead, as you know, what I do is the exact opposite. I teach people to own their lives. And you do that by forgiving everybody unequivocally, because anybody you don't forgive will show up as a resentment. Resentment is when you want something to be different that you can't change. So that's insanity. You know, Eckhart Tolle says, you either change your life, or you either accept your life or change it. Any other position is insane. So if you complain about something you can't change, that's insane. So the way to eliminate that is to forgive. So attachment, atonement, attunement. Attunement, I say in the book, mirror neurons do not fire via text message. So we live in this crazy culture where we're always sitting there with our heads down and doing this thing. And we need hugs, man. We need to hold hands. We need to break bread with people. You know, when I see people eating in their car, I'm like, oh man, like that's you know, like sit and talk and do this and put your arm on someone's shoulder and throw a Frisbee on the beach, you know? And instead, people are like, no, I'm too busy. I can't do that. I have to do this, like blah, 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 blah. So attachment, atonement, attunement, and then presence, super simple. I use the tools of yoga and meditation, which I teach, and those get you into the present moment. And if you watch my first DVD, I say, Depression relates to thoughts about the past. Anxiety relates to thoughts about the future. The past no longer exists. It's dead and gone. The future doesn't exist. Only your imaginations about it exist. So how can depression and anxiety exist? So on that DVD, I get people to own the fact that their mind is creating these feelings. And I feel like that's a super empowering position, because if you're creating them, that means that you can uncreate them, you can change them, right? So the key is to learn how to be present, Mm-hmm. So attachment, atonement, attunement, presence, and then the last is congruence. And congruence is the privilege of living in a society like we do, where you can decide who you want to be and have the tools to create an amazing life and be who you want to be. So the quote that starts the book, as you know, is by Andre Gide, who said, "It is better to be hated for what you are than to be loved for what you are not." And if you look at Instagram, you can see that we create facades when we're young that we think will be attractive to other people. And then we kind of just inhabit those facades. And that's why authenticity is the only antidote, the only panacea, because you want other people to show up real and be authentic and vulnerable. But if you're just showing up as your facade, how are you going to enroll them in what you want, what the relationship you want out of them? So again, attachment, atonement, attunement, presence, and congruence. And that's the formula to be authentic.
Yeah, I've got lots of questions brewing up in my mind. There are a couple of directions I can go from here. But the first thing that I wanted to ask was, in the atonement, you said forgiveness is really powerful, which I myself have experienced as well. However, for somebody who's been holding on to that anger or resentment or that pain, that hurt for years, that's sort of become who they are today, right?
Exactly.
And
so that's why you need, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's why you need to ask them, who would you be, right?
Without that.
If you were able to release that anger, resentment, who would you be?
Right.
Yeah. Go to the other side and just really tap into the freedom. For me, as you know, after 25 years, I took this compassion workshop at Berkeley. And I found the driver of the car on Facebook, and I engaged in a dialogue with him, and we went back and forth for a week. And I was really blown away, because you don't talk to someone for 25 years. It's anything could happen. And he showed up like a gentleman, and he was really sorry. And he told me how. If he could go back and not have caused that accident, he would. And I said, if it does anything to, alleviate your, thoughts, bad thoughts and things, I forgive you. And at that moment in time, it's like all of my craziness got released. And it's really interesting because if you're not willing to forgive, that means that you're not done suffering. So if you want to release your own suffering, then forgiveness does not mean that you condone somebody's behavior. Forgiveness means that you release your right to resent that something happened. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you condone someone else's behavior. It means that you release the right to resent that something happened. And, people are ready when they're ready. If you ask me during the first 5, 10, 15 years after the car accident, Ira, you really need to forgive him, I would have freaked out, but there comes a time where I wanted to be somebody else. Do you know what I mean? I wanted to own my life. I wanted to try something new on and get out of the paradigm that I had been in.
Do you think that in that process of forgiving, we need to forgive ourselves as well?
Yes. We need to forgive ourselves. It's a really, I'm going to just tweak that word a little bit. I like Tara Brach's work. I really think she's a genius. So she wrote Radical Acceptance, and I always refer people to her website, tarabrach.com, because actually she's a much better meditation teacher than I am, and she has tons of forgiveness meditations. And you need to. It's funny. It's like I said when I started this. I don't know who discovered water, but I doubt it was a fish. That's a quote by Marshall McLuhan. So we have very little insight into our own way of being. So therapy is a very good way of getting some insight into, how other people can see you. Your intimate relationships always bring out the worst and the best in you, hopefully. And then there's other modalities that you can access to find out like who you are at your core, and then the stuff that you're holding on to that's really kind of holding you back.
So do you think that the path to authenticity is the process of healing ourselves and letting go of those masks? Would you say
Absolutely.
that? Yeah.
It's not, it's funny. I wouldn't say it's not letting go. There's this I want to say tweaking. I mean, I can't wake up tomorrow and be Madonna, right? So I'm always going to be Ira. So it's a matter of shaping and being able to show up in a more vulnerable way, because essentially what happens is we become our defense mechanisms, right? And so, you want to be able to let them down, particularly in intimate relationships. You want to be able to just not be those reactions waiting for stimuli. That's why authenticity is so key, because if you're in the present moment, you can say, wow, that's really interesting. Somebody said that word, and 5 years ago that would have triggered the shit out of me, and I would have, whatever. But right now I'm going to make a conscious decision to, I'll tell you a story. I don't know if this is relevant or not. So I pulled my car around in Culver City last week, and I pulled up in a parking spot, behind a parking spot. And there was a guy in the car, and I could see him looking at me, and he didn't have his blinker on, whether he was going out or going in. He was just sitting in the middle of a spot. So I just sat behind him because I was totally patient, right? And, after like 5 minutes or something, I just had a smile on my face, and he was a very large fellow, and it was a bigger car than mine. I don't know if that matters. And I pulled up to smile, and I said, are you leaving or whatever? And before I could start getting into it, he was like, you figured it out. You finally figured it out. You figured it out, dickhead, right? And he called me a name. And I was just thinking to myself, I was like, wow, that's so interesting. Like this person, his reality is I get out of a car with a golf club, and then he gets out of a car with a gun, and I end up dead, and he ends up in jail. That's his way of thinking of dealing with another human being who's in a car. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And then I just drove off and I took another spot. But I can tell you, 25 years ago or something, I might have said something that exacerbated the situation, and maybe we both got out of our cars and did something stupid. But I was just it's so interesting to deal with a past paradigm, something that I've shed that. Someone calls me a dickhead in the street, I'm just like, wow, that's really interesting, but 25 years ago, I might, what's that Robert De Niro line? Are you talking to me? Are you talking? Yeah, you're the dickhead. No, you're the dickhead. I don't even know how guys do that anymore, but it happens on television and sports events all the time. But, that's a learned primal or learned stupid, misunderstanding, So anyways, that's my little story.
Yeah, no, I totally get it, because I've been looking at my own triggers as well, even simple things, because what I normally say is how I do anything is how I do everything.
Totally.
And, going into a restaurant, and I ask the waitress to give me a menu, and she would talk to me with the attitude. Maybe 10 years ago, I would get really pissed off. And why the heck is she talking to me like that? But today I'm going, maybe she's had a bad day. Yeah. And I can see where the triggers have gone. But talking about triggers and defense mechanism, there's one thing that I wanted to ask that you mentioned in your book. You said that we all have the wounded child within us who's subconsciously looking for that love, acceptance from caregivers who either withheld love, loved us conditionally, or treated us in ways that we did not understand. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So as human beings, as sentient beings, feeling beings, the one thing we want above all is to be loved unconditionally. And we grew up in this crazy competitive society that only gave us tools to gain love conditionally, because we're rich, because we're sexy, because we're smart, because we speak well, because we went to a good school, because we're wearing the right t-shirt, have the right jewelry, whatever it is. And so we're constantly seducing people into liking us. And it's a giant resentment trap, because eventually you say, well, you wouldn't be having sex with me if I didn't own an airplane, or you wouldn't be doing this with me if I didn't, look good in a bathing suit, and I love, internet dating, because supposedly, I don't look at the guys, but I hear that all the guys have these 6-pack ab and these things, right? And all the women that I look at, they're firstly, they're at shooting ranges, which I don't understand. And then they're jumping out of airplanes. And then they're at Machu Picchu doing the yoga pose dancer. And then, hold on, let me think. Some of them are in front of cars. And I always imagine the wedding of like those two people. Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, blah, blah, blah. And why are you marrying him? Well, 6-pack abs. I think that bodes well for a good future. And why are you marrying her? Oh, well, she jumped out of an airplane and she shot a kangaroo and, okay, man and wife. So we have these facades, and it's really hindering us from getting as close to the unconditional love, which is actually just secure attachment, knowing that somebody's there and they just have your best interest at heart. So again, I'm trying to get people to just show up authentically so they don't end up 5 years down the line feeling like, their husband or wife just likes them for the facade that they show them when they really want them to love them for the inner self that they don't show them. So there's this kind of like paradox that I'm trying to just like blow open.
Exactly. What if that guy loses his 6-packs one day?
He will.
And he will. Would you get a divorce? But, you talk about attachment styles a lot, and I'm really interested in the attachment theory and everything. So just for the listeners who are not familiar with this attachment style, attachment theory, it's basically, when we were growing up, please correct me if I'm wrong, when we're growing up, it's how we feel attached to our caregivers, right? Whether it's secure or avoidant or their phone types. And so they become pretty much a template for how we operate in our adult life. So let's just say if I had a secure attachment as a baby, does that mean that now I'm going to look for someone who can give me that secure attachment? How does that work?
Yeah, you're more apt to lean in. So I'll just go through it if you don't mind. So John Bowlby, English psychologist in the 1960s, I think it was about 1964, came up with attachment theory. And as you said, there's secure attachment, and then there's two different types originally of insecure attachment. And then Mary Ainsworth in 1969 conducted these experiments called the strange situation. So she would take a mom and a baby and put them in a room, and then the mom would leave the room and then come back. And so what happens, a baby, and I'll let me go into one other thing and then I'll come back. So there was a theorist who passed away 5 or 6 years ago. His name was Yanov, and he has this book called Primal Therapy. He was right here on Abbot Kinney, and I actually went to the place. John Lennon did the primal therapy and whatnot. And he says, the first time you put a baby down in another room, which is a sign of wealth in our culture, that your baby has a separate room. The first time your baby's pre-verbal, doesn't speak, but you're sitting there speaking English because that's how you communicate. So you're like, okay, baby, I'll be back in 8 hours. Good night, right? And so he says that the baby thinks, you're killing me. And so that's a primal betrayal. It's the primal core abandonment wound. Okay. So then you cut to 6 to 18 months later, and you have these experiments with these babies. And so The mother is in the room and she leaves the room, and then one of a couple of things happens. So if a baby has secure attachment, the baby will just be a drop anxious, like, what's going on? Mommy's leaving. But the baby knows that the mom wouldn't put it in harm's way. So the baby plays, and then the mom comes back, the baby jumps in her arms, secure reattachment, no problem. That happened in these experiments in 33% of the cases. Now, in the insecure attachments, there were two types originally and a third type added, and I'll tell you why that's so important. So the three types of insecure attachment, there's ambivalent, and so the baby kind of cries pretty badly, and then the mom comes in, and then the baby's kind of like 1 foot out the door, kind of like, I don't know what I should do. That was really scary. Da 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 da. So that's one type, and then the second type, which is really interesting to me because I think it's kind of spreading in our culture, is avoidant attachment. It's endearing. So this is what happens. The mom leaves the room. The baby kind of freaks out, right? But then it calms itself down. It self-soothes, and then the mom comes back in the room, and the baby goes like this. Well, fuck you. You left and it hurt. And if I reattach, it's just going to happen again. So I'm not going to reattach. So I find most of the people around here have indifferent or avoidant attachment. And then the third type of insecure is really bad. That's called disorganized. And I think it's funny because Sue Johnson, who wrote Hold Me Tight, she thinks that most of the insecure attachments show up later in life as depression and anxiety. But I personally think disorganized attachment in a baby shows up as borderline personality in adults. So a borderline personality, someone who suffers from borderline personality, they're so desperate to attach. So they're like, oh my God, you're the best. We should be best friends. You're amazing. You're so great. And then like 3 days later, you like put their text to, you don't answer their phone call or something like that. And then they're like, I'm going to kill myself, and you're like, what the fuck? Like, where did you learn that? Those are the worst tools ever, right? So they glam on, and then then they jump off and they threaten, they do horrible things. So again, there's secure attachment, 33%, and then the rest is split up into ambivalent, avoidant, and disorganized. And for me, people want to look cool, so they're just like, oh yeah, I don't need anybody else, and they just avoid intimacy, and they don't realize that they're just going to wither and grow old and die with a bunch of nurses changing their diapers instead of like in a community.
So somebody who grew up with the other three types, not the secure, but the ambivalent, the avoidant, or even the disorganized, what do they do now that they're the adult?
You got to learn how to be authentic, meaning you have to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to go off the deep end right now, and maybe your listeners are not going to be so thrilled, but we're the only mammal who drinks the milk of another mammal. We're meant to breastfeed for 4 or 5 years. We're meant to sleep in our mother's arms. As I said, it's a sign of wealth that a baby has its own bed, the baby has its a nanny, and we have in our society these scientific rules like you only breastfeed for 18 months and then the kid goes to this and the kid's potty trained and blah, 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 blah. And as I say in the book, we have to look at the unintended ramifications of the way we individuate children, because we have this culture of, there's 100 million prescriptions of antidepressants written every year in my country of 330 million people. 22 million Americans woke up this morning and took an antidepressant. And as I write in the book, is there some sort of rogue gene that only affects Americans, or could it be that we're individuating children too abruptly? They really don't know how to connect with other human beings. And now in this day and age, it's getting worse and worse and worse because we delude ourselves into thinking that like, oh my God, I got a text message or I got 500 Instagram likes. I'm so happy. And you're not. You're going to cry yourself to sleep. That doesn't make you happy. You need hugs, man. You need to connect on a human level without the devices.
Okay, so the thing is, as a child, right, a child's mind is not as developed. Like even for us adults, we give meanings to experiences differently. For a child, it could be even worse. So let's
much
just
worse.
say much worse. Like I have a 13-month-old.
Oh,
right?
yeah?
I have a 13-month-old, and I sent him to daycare 3 days a week. And every time I drop him off, he would cling on to me, he would
Yeah.
cry, and that breaks my heart. But then I'm thinking, oh my God, am I creating abandonment in him? Is he going to think that I'm abandoning him? And so I'm like, what do I do? Like, now I know all of these, but then at some point in our lives, I think my parents are, I think I have one of the best parents in the world, you know, but
That's so
then I still have my own set of issues with them, or when I was young,
yeah.
because I still created shitty meanings in my head. Why things
I'll
are
tell you
things
the
and
problem. So for an unformed brain, and particularly children, like I'd say like 5 to 13, they believe that the universe revolves around them. So if anything goes wrong in the home, like mommy has a migraine, the cat got hit by a car, anything goes wrong, the kid thinks there's something wrong with me. If I were perfect, then my parents would have gotten divorced, then the car accident wouldn't have happened, then this bad thing would have happened. And that's really interesting, because what that shows up later in life, that shows up as low self-esteem. And that shows up as not good enough. And, I'll be happy when I'm president. I'll be happy when I have this car. I'll be happy when I have this or whatever. And anybody who says that will never be happy, because there's something called a hedonic treadmill, where once you sate a desire, it gets replaced by another desire. So, I mean, parenting's the most difficult job in the world. There's no perfect way to instill what you're trying to do, because they're actually not mutually exclusive. But the perfect balance is between instilling healthy self-esteem, but not narcissism, and then healthy self-regulation, but not like OCD crazy, So in some ways, you want to be loving, and you want to empower the child so that it can branch out on its own. And also you want to allow it to assimilate discipline in a loving way, so that it says, oh, mommy will be happy if I use a toilet rather than the nappy, and so I'll do that. So it's really interesting. There's this balance. And as I talk about in the book, parenting comes in waves. So I think that my parents' generation after World War II was very oppressive, right? They weren't coddling at all. And there's people like me have really good self-regulation, right? So I treat kids today whose parents are my age, and the parents seem super cool to me, but the parents are extremely laissez-faire. Like, the kids come home like, Dad, I'm thinking of trying heroin. And the father's like, okay, you can try heroin, but don't drive and do heroin. And if I came home one day 30 years ago and said, Dad, I'm thinking of doing heroin, he would punch me in the face. And, I would have locked in a room for a year, just like that, So there was like this one ethos of parenting, because we were scared. The Russians could bomb us anytime. You have to make strong kids in case a second Hitler comes back, So there was a parenting style then, and then now there's another parenting style. And that kid who came into my office and said, I want to try heroin, to his father, and his father said, do, whatever. His subconscious mind is, my parents don't give a shit about me. They let me do whatever I want. So there's no perfect parenting, it's the hardest job in the world, but you really have to sit there and engage those young minds in a way where you're empowering them and to make healthy decisions about their lives. And you're showing up in a way so that, they get there, that like, I'm lovable, I'm not unworthy. Like they love me. They care about me. They put a little structure on my life, but not too much.
Yeah. Well, you talk about balance, and that leads me to the question that I wanted to ask. So you have studied different religions. I'm originally from Burma, so I have a big Buddhist influence since young. I wanted to ask, how has the Buddhism influence helped you in your work? So that's one question. And also, I know that you have also dealt with other modalities.
And Hinduism. Vedanta too,
So I would love to know, what are the things that have a big influence on your personal life and also the work that you do?
Buddhism is not a religion. Buddhism is a prescription to alleviate suffering. And so it's very simple. The root of all suffering is desire, is the second noble truth, and that shows up as clinging and aversion. And Freud talks about this too. So it's threaded throughout our culture. But the problem with our mind, and I'm so sorry for pumping authenticity so much, but if you're authentic, then you're in the present moment. And if it's painful, you're like, this is painful and it'll pass. And if you're in the present moment and it's wonderful, you're like, this is amazing and it'll pass. And I make a joke in my workshops. I say, you know that you're enlightened when at the height of your most bliss-filled, ecstatic orgasm, you can say, this too shall pass. Because we want the bad stuff to pass, but we want the good stuff to stay. And life isn't like that. You know, the anecdote, there's 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. And when I say that to you right now, your mind is like, that sounds fair. And in about 5 minutes, you're like, no, I want to be the guy who has 10,001 joys and 9,999 sorrows. So Buddhism is a humanistic psychology to understand that our minds create desires. And then for me, you know, I don't know how your viewers will like this, but a lot of desires are we're brainwashed essentially. Like if you see something for MAC lipstick come up on the side of your screen 18 times, you're going to say like, you know, I always wanted to try MAC lipstick, right? So, you know, we live in this culture where there's a lot of psychologists who have studied how to influence people, and all these corporations choose orange packaging or this kind of pop-up or this video or put a pretty somebody in an Instagram thing holding Kellogg Fruit Flakes or I try not to allow my senses to be overwhelmed by stimuli like that, but you know. So to be in touch with your desires and know where they come from, and then want to choose love rather than ego gratification, I think is one of the beauties of studying Buddhism. Again, it's a prescription to alleviate suffering. And if you listen to your ego for your life, you're going to cause a lot of drama and suffering. Okay. So then for me, in a spiritual sense, since that's not spiritual, that's psychological, I espouse Advaita Vedanta. So it's a Hindu, there's different types of Hinduism. There's 6 different darshanas, viewpoints. The one is called Vedanta, non-dual, right? So there's 5 terms. Do you want me to go into this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So in Vedanta, there's 5 terms. The first one is Brahman. And Brahman, the best translation I heard is that without attributes. So basically, if you can think it, it's not it. It's like if I say imagine infinity, you can get a placeholder like the sky or the cosmos, but your mind is very limited. That the arrogance of us that we can conceive of things is unfathomable. So the first term is Brahman, and the second one is Atman. And Atman, the best translation is soul, but in all the Hindu texts, it's self with a capital S. So there's Brahman, Atman, and then Samsara. Samsara is the wheel of reincarnation. Only 25% of Americans believe in reincarnation, but there's a gentleman, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who I think passed around 13 years ago. He was the head of psychiatry of the University of Virginia, and he documented all of these cases of children who remember their past lives. So Samsara is the third term, and then the fourth one is Maya, which is illusory. I don't like the translation illusion. I like illusory because basically everything's ephemeral. Everything that you feel is ephemeral, right? So you can't grasp it. You know what I mean? That's why it's illusory. It's not real and permanent. And then the fifth term is karma, which obviously is the law of action and reaction. So for me, Advaita Vedanta spawned meditation and then yoga because these are tools that help you transcend Maya, go to the other side of your thoughts, the other side of your 5 senses to realize that Atman equals Brahman. That you are divine, that you are God, that you are the matrix, And that's why right now, if you're meditating and all of a sudden you feel something terrible happen in the Bahamas, who's getting 180-degree winds right now, like there's a disruption in the force, right? Like that's why we love these movies, Star Wars and The Matrix and things like that, because we really are all interconnected, and it's obfuscated. We don't understand that because Maya only tells us, oh, I'm me and you're you, and that's the chair and that's a car and things like that. It gives
Separation.
us all, right. So I love Vedanta, and I'll relate them all together. So there is a one adage, and it does come from Buddhism. It's called one mountain, many paths, right? So for me, yoga and meditation are walking up the mountain, right? Mm-hmm. And then ayahuasca is the helicopter up the mountain. And then DMT is the rocket ship up the mountain. So, yeah, if you want to experience God and everythingness, there are natural tools. Unfortunately, your brain can't process that information. It's like trying to pour the ocean into a thimble, right? I mean, it's just, that's why it's so funny to read about people trying these medicines recreationally. I'm like, there's only one reason why you should dabble in any of this, and that's because you want to meet God. And unfortunately, you're not going to understand what she has to tell you. And then you're going to need to integrate it into your life and come back into this reality where, like, I have to shower and put on pants and go buy coffee, right? And you're just and you're thinking like, I was the universe last week, and now I'm changing the oil on my car.
Yeah.
So to end, I'll say that the problem is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is essentially a binary machine. It breaks things into antinomies: tall, short, left, right, black, white, and that's not the way the world is. The world is everythingness. There's no such thing as time. Time is a man-made construction, past, present, and future, and all of this is illusory, which, if you're a teenager, makes you solipsistic, and you keep on saying, what's the point, Mom? What's the point? The universe is expanding. We're all going to die anyways. Why do I have to go to chemistry class? But then all of a sudden, when you realize that, like, life is inherently meaningless, and the line is, life is meaningless, and it's meaningless that it's meaningless, which basically should propel you to create a wonderful, meaningful life, because you have a blank canvas in front of you, and then you can look at Buddhism and look at Kabbalah and look at Hinduism and see if yoga works for you, or hiking works for you, or ayahuasca works for you, or monogamy works for you, or Burning Man works for you, or whatever. And you get information, and then you go a little bit outside of your paradigm. You try things, and you evaluate, and you just try to show up as your highest self in every possible situation, and burn off your bad karma, burn off your bad juju, forgive yourself, as you said earlier, and just try to create the most beautiful, wonderful life ever.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So my question is, what do you think in our society today, what do you think is the one thing that we all need to do right now?
Community. Really just go out of our way to build community, to stop. See, the problem is that our school system, which is a product of capitalism, it puts people in competition with each other. And that's really bad. My whole class is based on the fact that I can't be great unless you're great. I need to know that you're great, and that's the way I am in my office. And that's the way, you have to give until it hurts, and then you give more, right? Like you really have to, you can't think like, oh, like they have a Lamborghini, they must be happy, and I'm just sitting here with my little Porsche, like the mind compares, and you have to say no, like I don't want that person's karma. I don't want Bill Gates' karma. I mean, I mean, the guy has Asperger's, can't leave his house without a militia. I don't want to be anyone else, right? I don't want to be Brad Pitt. I don't want to be Angelina Jolie. I don't want to be anybody, right? I know that I'm living like this is a gift that I have, and I gotta, work with the deficits that I have and make the tweaks on my own ego and, find ways to just show up and inspire other people.
Well, Ira, thank you so much for sharing all those interesting things. Before we go, I'd like to ask you just one final question. You are someone who brings very light, expensive energy, and you're filled with lots of wisdom and knowledge. And I'm interested personally, how do you spend your days every day? Because you do research, you learn, you talk to people.
Looking for inspiration. That's the main thing that drives me. It's like whether it's painting there are portals. The New York Times, Sunday New York Times is a cultural portal for me. I read the arts and leisure section, and I read the style section. I read these things. And then I go online and, I get these book recommendations, and then I get these museum recommendations. And then there's a bunch of other websites. So for me, every day, I'm just seeking inspiration. I want to expand my horizons. I hope I'm just continuously learning and meeting interesting people and just having really loving interactions that are helpful to them and to me. But really the key word is, and inspiration, the etiology of the word is breath, right? So it's just coming back to the breath, coming back to me, but just trying to slowly tease a new, more expansive, wonderful community and reality, and just create as much love as possible.
Beautiful. Thank you. And for those who are listening and watching this interview, if they want to connect with you. Yeah.
Like that woman this morning called me from Florida, wanted to learn about meditation. No, I love that. iraisrael.com, www.iraisrael. Send me a little, email or call or just, there's tons of videos and I love engaging. So please don't be shy.
Yay. Beautiful. I will add all those links, including your book, on the show notes as well. So thank you so much for your time, Ira.